Hey, what's up guys, I'm Josh, and this is the MEZE LIRIC 2. I want to thank MEZE for sending this out, though they didn't pay or ask me to say anything good or bad. All of the thoughts are of course my own. For full transparency, I'm now part of MEZE's affiliate program, but my goal here is to be as unbiased as possible. But you can decide on your own. When it comes to build quality, MEZE is a unique brand. A lot of companies, as you get closer towards the product, as you really dive deep into the build quality, it becomes less and less impressive. But MEZE is kind of the opposite of that. The closer that you look at their designs, the more impressive they are. And this is no exception to that rule. This is a very, very well-built headphone. It might be the best built closed back headphone that I've ever laid my hands on. And I think they did an overall bang up job on the build, except for a couple small things, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, I do prefer the original look of the LIRIC 1 with the blacked out cups, though you may prefer this wood look. And this is nice wood. This is Makassar ebony wood, which I've never heard of, but it looks nice and it's supposed to be a high quality wood as far as I'm told. In the box, it does come with a carry case, and mine came with 2 cables. I'm not sure if I received an extra cable as part of the kind of review deal, but if this does come with this braided cable, both the Empyrean and this have an amazing cable that might be the highest quality in the industry. It's very, very nice. The yoke, when it comes to precision and materials and quality of build, it's exceptional, though I do question its kind of usefulness because it kind of sits in this awkward kind of hunched state. It's kind of weird to me that this yoke mechanism, while it seems overly designed and maybe a little bit too far in terms of functionality, it's a little bit strange. This does come with detachable ear cups, but being a closed back headphone, it does get a little bit warm, though definitely not the worst I've seen. I think the material choices here are a big part in making that not get overly hot, so smart on them for that. At 430 grams, this is a little bit heavier than the previous version, though to be quite honest, you don't really feel it. It's a very comfortable headphone with really good weight distribution. It's a lot like their Empyrean line where they have really no real hot spots for my head at least, and it's an overall comfortable design that doesn't seem to give you this super heavy headphone feel, which is nice. Internally, this is working with a Quirm driver, which is a quarter wavelength resonator mask. No idea what any of that means. I honestly don't even care that much. I just kind of care how it sounds and how it performs. And the last thing on the build here is that this is still made in Romania. So I never reviewed the original LIRIC for a couple of reasons. One, I was really busy when it came out, but two, a lot of people were just telling me that I wasn't gonna like it because it wasn't supposed to be very good. Now, when they emailed me about this headphone, they actually intentionally laid out some of the things that they were trying to improve over LIRIC 1. So it's nice to see that instead of just having a number 2 of a headphone, they are actually intentionally trying to change specific issues with the first one. Specifically reducing some of the upper and mid-range issues that it had. That was a common complaint I heard amongst my peers, and it looks like they've addressed that. And so let's go ahead and start with the mid-range, which I think is actually one of the more impressive regions of this headphone, which for a closed headphone is not that common for it to be very good at mid-range, in my experience. But this one actually nails it. I would consider the vocals to be very organic sounding. They do not sound sterile or overly clean or like inorganic in any sense. They seem very, very natural. And I think that this is a really impressive part of the tuning here. Now that naturalness is also paired with a decent amount of precision. So they feel correct, they feel neutral, but not boring. They actually sound really, really good. I think the frequency forwardness, again, I think that one of their design goals was not to push it too far forward. And I think they took just a hair over too much off of it because I actually would have liked a tiny bit more presence here, but overall it's pretty good. And for a closed back headphone, it's definitely good. Most of what I'm comparing this to is its own bigger brother, the Empyrean 2. So that's hard to stack up against. A good test song for this is Life Worth Living by Laurel. This is, she's kind of harsh there. I love the song, but she's got a pretty forward delivery in a lot of her vocals. And this headphone on that song just breezes right through it. From what I can gather, it would have been a big issue on the previous version, and it's not even notable as an issue on this headphone. So A+ for fixing your issues there. The rest of the headphone honestly sounds like a slightly bass boosted version of a relatively balanced headphone. It's got a decent amount of treble, a decent amount of mid-range. Again, I would have preferred a little bit more, and a decent amount of bass response that is a little bit enhanced in classic MEZE fashion. I would say that treble is actually, despite its level of refinement, which is fairly good, it's relatively inoffensive. And when it comes to closed back headphones, I feel like they're either overly damped and boomy and boxy and just like closed in on the top end and not really enough, or they seem to take it too far, like with a lot of Fostex headphones, where there's just freaking bright. They're just way too harsh or sibilant, or they just have some massive systemic issue in the treble. This headphone, while I don't consider it perfect treble performance, there's a couple small issues I have with it, is largely inoffensive. It doesn't have any major glaring issues, in my opinion, unless you're really into timbre, which is its one treble limitation, aside from just preference on frequency response. The timbre here sort of parallels that of the Empyrean 2, which was, in comparison to other ultra high-end headphones, is a little bit limited for timbre. When it comes to specifically metallic timbre, I do think that this is a little bit limited. And you can tell it's metal, of course, but it just doesn't quite sound like metal. And so when you're listening to a lot of cymbal hits, even the top end of like a lot of brass instruments, there isn't quite that metallic shimmer that you will get with some other headphones. So that was one limitation on the treble response through an overall pretty good performance. What's interesting also about the treble performance is that overall it seems detailed. Overall it seems fairly balanced with the rest of the region, but it manages to be warm and detailed, but without being kind of dark bright, a term which basically describes how treble can have an overall dark appearance with some hot spots in the treble. And this doesn't really have that substantially to me. It actually sounds fairly complete. I think that there's definitely going to be some preferences on where people will prefer a little bit more treble or a little bit less. Maybe even above 14,000 hertz. I think a little bit of a boost here might have aided in its sound staging, making it a little bit wider, but that also comes with its own detriments. So while the treble doesn't blow me away for impressiveness, I also struggled to find massive issues with it too. Bass response is sort of the same way. It's an impressive bass performing headphone if you are really into bass performance. When it comes to a $2,000 closed back headphone though, I don't know if it's the best bass performance that exists out there. I think I would personally give that crown to the Sony Z1R. And if you're into bass, I would personally pick that headphone. But this headphone does have a substantial bass response that is a little bit enhanced from the rest of its mid-range and treble response regions. And that included with its impressive dynamic capability there, it hits pretty freaking hard. This thing has a decent bit of slam to it. In fact, a lot of songs, bass is what's driving a lot of the rhythm, which I like a lot. Now, the bass quality is the real difference maker here. I think that they could have made a small adjustment, and maybe this might even be something doable with a small pad adjustment, where I wish they had a little bit less mid bass and a little bit more sub bass. The sub bass is strong, it performs very well, but the mid bass does have a little tiny bit of boxiness and bloat to it. The mid bass sounds a little bit murky. It's not quite as resolving as its bigger brother, the Empyrean 2. And what's funny about that is the actual tuning of the bass seems relatively similar between the two, but the resolution ability and maybe the fact that it's just open back, maybe that's just the difference maker. On the Empyrean 2, it allows it to get away with that bass tuning, whereas this, it feels like a little bit of a downside to a critical ear. And the bass response is better than any of the other closed MEZEs, but it still has some work to do, I think. And I think that bass response will probably be the biggest complaint for users moving forward, especially for reviewers who have a little bit more critical of an ear. But quite frankly, this bass boost and the decent amount of quality that is there, I think will be impressive to most users, except for super hypercritical users like myself. Now, dynamics. Dynamics are pretty impressive through this headphone's mid-range and bass response. That's where you notice them most. A vocalist can really stand out if they're really trying. I also found that the dynamic potential was greatest on an amplifier with this, like a dedicated amp. Now, I don't have exact specifications for this headphone, but the LIRIC one was pretty efficient, and this one seems pretty efficient as well. It can be driven relatively well off of most things. Though even with its efficiency, I still think that I wasn't really able to get really good performance off of this, just off of things like a MacBook or a phone. I really liked using the XD05 Pro on this. Not a sponsor or anything, it's just the amplifier that I thought paired really well with this because of the power output of this matched with the 4.4 millimeter of this very nice cable. So I think a lot of the dynamic potential comes in listening a little bit louder, and you want to get to that volume and play that volume well without it sounding frail or thin on a decent amplifier like this one. Now, sound staging. This is possibly the weakest technical component of this headphone. Sound staging is very good on the Empyrean 2. This less so. A lot of sounds just sound very internal. It sounds very focused in your head. It does not seem to extend far beyond. The imaging is fairly good, though it does follow a similar shape to its bigger brother, the Empyrean 2, being more on the sides and in the middle of your head rather than front and back like some other headphones can do. So this one follows that shape, but it's just a little bit smaller. Now, while I find this to be objectively not as good a performer, this does have some benefits of its own. If you want it to sound personal and intense and in your head where everything kicks very hard, everything seems very focused, and because of its tuning without being too harsh, that's kind of what this headphone offers. And to some users and some songs, that's honestly a big benefit without wanting that wider, thinner sounding surround that some wider soundstaging headphones can have. So I think like most audio, it really just depends on your perspective on this, on whether or not you'll like that soundstaging performance. It performs really well in games. It's maybe not the most believable in terms of immersiveness, but for a closed back headphone, it's pretty good. Though I think if you're looking for either wider soundstage or gaming performance, I think that something like an Odyssey Maxwell will be a better headphone for those specific purposes. When it comes to my conclusion, as far as MEZE's open back line, I don't think this is quite as impressive as something like the Empyrean 2. It also costs less and it's a closed back headphone, so it's not going to be as good. That's just how it works. That being said, it's still the best closed back MEZE that they've come out with. And I like the improvements in sound quality that they've made. I like where they're going with it. I think this does a good job of furthering what I think of as MEZE's closed back headphone sound. I think it's improving in some areas like the mid-range. It's probably the best closed back mid-range I've heard out of MEZE, probably the most resolving closed back headphone I've heard out of MEZE. And quite frankly, I'm really looking forward to what MEZE can do in the future. So it is actually pretty rare that I recommend a closed back headphone. This thing doesn't absolutely knock my socks off, but I still think it's a pretty good performer. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it towards the right person. I don't think it has any major glaring issues. So if you're a fan of MEZE, I think this is gonna really impress. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Subscribe, join the Patreon, do all the fun shit. All right, see you in the next video.